So what will it take to break the logjam on the big issues that divide the country on guns? Will it take a new generation, maybe combat veterans who know all about guns and the damage they cause, to get past the politics? So we got two members of Congress, both 38 years old, who have very different views on the gun control debate, to sit together at my kitchen table. Virginia Republican Scott Taylor, a former Navy SEAL sniper who saw combat in Iraq and recovered from severe injuries sustained there. And Massachusetts Democrat Seth Moulton, a former Marine Corps captain and combat platoon leader who had 4 tours in Iraq. And I began by asking Congressman Moulton to make the case for why he thinks gun restrictions would decrease gun violence.
Well, they're shown to affect gun violence. I mean, there are plenty of studies that show that states that have tighter gun laws have less gun violence. And this is an American epidemic. It's really a public health crisis. I've seen the effects of gun violence firsthand in Iraq. And I know that it has no place in our schools, on our streets, at our concerts. And there are things that we can do to reduce it that are within the Second Amendment. You know, Scott and I swore an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, both as members of Congress and the same oath as a Navy SEAL and a United States Marine. So I don't want to do anything that violates the Constitution, but there are common sense things that we can do if Democrats and Republicans come together to reduce this violence in our communities.
You feel entirely differently.
Sure. And let me say, look, it's great to be with Seth as well too. And look, you know, he like most other folks that are in Congress, both Dems and Republicans, care very deeply about this country. They want to protect the Constitution. They want to protect their people. I understand that for sure. But at the same time, you know, when you have a situation that happened, which was tragic, traumatic, and everyone feels the same emotion, they do. But it's up to leaders like us to see clarity through the emotional chaos and to understand that it is a very high bar to be able to take some folks' rights away, to try to enact policies that may take their rights away, but not really do anything. So when you look at gun violence in America, and we look at deaths, we look at like 30-some thousand gun violence, the overwhelming majority of them are suicides. The overwhelming majority of them use handguns, right? When you look at some of the populations that are more predisposed, I guess, if you will, to gun violence. I mean, so there's domestic disputes, there's young men in certain areas. When you do look at some of the cities, when you look at the numbers of them, the vast majority of gun violence are in a few cities. And they all have tight restrictions on guns. You can't have a gun in D.C., but there's still gun violence. I mean,
as Justice Scalia has said, you can have restrictions under the Second Amendment, as we do with any amendment to the United States Constitution.
It is
and we already restrict, and you want to protect your family's home. Sure. I mean, a great way to protect your family's home, as you know, as a Navy SEAL, would be to have some landmines out front and have some grenades stockpiled. But we don't allow that in our country. We don't allow those weapons of war here. We don't allow families to own tanks. So we have reasonable restrictions that are perfectly respectful of the Second Amendment. And we know from experience that restrictions like this, the common sense reforms will help.
I would love to comment, because you hear reasonable, you hear common sense. Those are all wonderful words that everybody can agree are great, right? That make sounds well. The reality is, though, reasonable, common sense, what does that actually mean? And look, and I would also say, let me finish on that point, though, because I think, again, I want to say it, we have to see, you and I have to see clarity in all this emotion, and to say it is a high burden for these constitutional rights that we have, whether it's speech, whether it's freedom of the press, whether it's gun rights as well. It's a very high burden that shouldn't be swayed just by political emotion.
Let me talk about that.
Because I think a lot of times opponents of making these reforms talk about political emotion. I mean, I'm sitting here, I'm just trying to do something as a leader, as a representative in Congress of communities that want these reforms. 9 out of 10 Americans want background checks on guns. In fact, 69% of NRA
You agree with that?
There already are background checks. When you're a
universal background check.
When you're a federally licensed,
without loopholes,
when you're a federally licensed arm dealer, if you had universal backgrounds, somebody, if they really wanted to, and you very well know this, would be able to get around.
Scott, you can always,
if they want to do harm,
they can always find an exception. But like we don't say that.
Yeah, but these are the exceptions. These mass shootings are exceptions.
We don't say there are exceptions that are unique to America.
They're not unique to America. There are more of them in America. That's true.
There are far more.
That's true.
But why do you think that is? Why do you think that is? Let's stop there for a second. Why do you think that is? Why do you think there are far more mass shootings?
So let's talk about that. Some guy just in France killed 84 people.
How many mass shootings
with a car?
How many mass shootings?
But that's not the point, Seth. The point is, it is not unique. The point is, it is unique. The point is, it's not unique to America. It's not unique to America. Yes, there are more. There's no question about it. I understand that. But the reality is, like I said, I'm not willing to impede on someone's rights because of emotional rhetoric. And other thing is, when you look at evidence-based studies, you mentioned studies, the things that are proposed, like the background checks, like the assault ban, I know that you were supporting that, they don't necessarily help reduce gun violence.
Actually, background checks have been unequivocally shown to reduce.
But you already, if you're a federally licensed arm dealer, you have to have a background check anyway. I get a background check. You get a background check.
Almost 50% of gun sales do not happen through federally licensed dealers. So, I mean, look,
how many of those were used in mass shootings?
Do you think that...
How many of those were used in mass shootings? Because this guy went through a background check. In Vegas, he went through a background check.
You can always find an example of
but you say that. But I'm looking for... You mentioned one thing you said. We want to get things done. You said we want to get things done. I want to get things done too. So let's look at
Virginians. 9 out of 10 people...
That's not true. That is not true.
9 out of 10 Americans want us to do this. Why are we so afraid to have a conversation?
So I'm not afraid to have a conversation. I'm here having a conversation. I'm not willing to impede on people's rights based upon your political desires. I'm just not.
I want to go back, and you watched this horrible event this week. Just horrible event. Is there anything you thought that we should do differently as a nation?
That's a great question. So when you let's look at this instance, because there's, like I said, there's a lot of rhetoric out there. You got to do background checks and all these things. Well, this guy went through background checks. And his brother didn't know anything wrong with him. We didn't. Look, I'm still struggling with that profile as well, too. I don't understand. I think there's probably some other information that's going to come out. But the reality is, when you look at some of the things that have been proposed on the other side of people who want gun control, none of them would have done anything about this issue. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't do something. I'm saying when we look at gun violence in America and when you look at the populations that are more affected by it than other ones, I think there are some things that we can work together on doing. But it's simple just saying we're going to gun control without confiscating them. Because if you want to confiscate them, yeah, maybe we could do it then. But then you probably have civil war.
How about fully automatic weapons? Should those be legal without those restrictions?
That's a great question. I watched the video, and I listened to that rate of fire. And I'm sure that you did as well, too. You probably heard the same thing that I did. It was faster than semi-automatic. It was not as fast as fully automatic. It wasn't the same thing as fully automatic. But it was fast. The rate of fire was fast. And I hadn't even heard of bump stocks. And then I did some research on it. I think that should be reevaluated. I think that they should look at that again and figure out if, in fact, it should meet the same burden of a fully automatic. Because, of course, it is faster than semi-automatic.
How do you draw the line? I mean, semi-automatic, you can fire pretty quickly and do a lot of damage, too. Why do people need those weapons?
I don't feel like a semi-automatic weapon rises to that level of an automatic weapon. I said, I do believe when you look at this bump stock, and I think that ATF should reevaluate that.
Mark, first of all, we'll just say that Scott and I don't agree on all the details here. We both support the Second Amendment. We obviously disagree on exactly how gun reform should be carried out. But I respect the fact that you're willing to have a conversation. And this is the kind of conversation that we should be having. Democrats and Republicans across the aisle doing our job as representatives of Congress, representing the people in America. And when the American people are saying we need to do something about these mass shootings, we should be having conversations like this. And I'm actually working on a bipartisan bill that will eliminate this bump stock exception. And we'll try to address the other ways that you can get around this law. And look, the gun manufacturers were smart. They figured out a way to get around the law. It's the job of Congress to then step in and say, that was not our intent. We did not want to provide this loophole in the law, so we should fix it.
We've had conversations about Fort Hood shooting. We've had conversations about Newtown. We've had conversations about the Navy Yard shooting over the years. Nothing has really changed. So why do you think this will resonate now?
I don't know how many innocent Americans need to die in mass shootings like this before we're willing to simply have these discussions. I'm sitting down with Republicans in the House of Representatives working on legislation because of this mass shooting. The sad thing is that if we don't get anything done this time, we all know there will be another one. And someday, we'll have the courage to do something that's respectful of the Second Amendment, that respects the fact that we're a society that people like to hunt and people have the right to own guns, but not weapons of war. We have ways that we can reduce this violence. We're not going to eliminate it. You're right, Scott. There's no silver bullet that's going to eliminate all of these things. I mean, look, you live in Virginia. Virginia outlaws homicides and rapes, right? That doesn't mean that people don't get around the law and still figure out how to
law that's going to stop that.
Well, but you're also not going to repeal that law, right? And say that we shouldn't have any restrictions. I mean, there are common sense reforms. There are common sense laws that we can pass that are respectful of gun rights that still will reduce this public health crisis in America.
I hear reasonable, I hear common sense. That sounds great. But at the same time, what are they? What are they that actually, backed by evidence, do something? And I have not seen that. And I know that you support the Second Amendment. We disagree on how much we both support it or where it is. That's fine. Reasonable people can disagree, of course. But the Second Amendment is not just for hunting. And you hear that a lot. Oh, it's for hunting. It's not for hunting. And I get how weapons have changed over time. But the Second Amendment was put in place to be able to overthrow tyranny. And with weapons of war at the time. Now, look, I don't disagree that people shouldn't have tanks and stuff like that, but let's not misunderstand history. I mean, that's why it's there. So I think there are people who feel very, very strongly about that, very strongly, and same on your side as well too. And look, and I applaud you for reaching across the aisle and trying to figure out ways that are reasonable, that aren't what I've heard in some of the emotional, not you, but the emotional other folks with your party that have come out and said things that I don't find reasonable. I find they take people's rights away.
So I think that restricting these modifications like bump stocks and other things that turn semi-automatic weapons into automatic weapons that we've outlawed before, do you think that's reasonable?
I think yes. So you could create a law that says, okay, you can't modify your semi-automatic to automatic, which is already illegal, right? But you know as well as I do that it's not that hard to figure out. If you want to figure it out, and you're a little bit crafty, you can do it. You know that. And so if you just create a law, you're already outside of the law if you're doing it.
Well, I do, but the reality is that these bump stocks are available for sale. I mean, we don't know if this shooter had the skill
Had you ever heard
to modify
of him
his... I had not heard of him before either.
I hadn't either.
But there's a difference between being able to have to machine a part to make a weapon into an automatic weapon versus just buying something off the shelf.
So where do we go from here? Where do you think we'll be a year from now?
I hope that this conversation will continue. It took some courage for Scott to show up here, especially as a Republican, because a lot of Republicans are not willing to have this conversation. And I'm willing to sit down as a Democrat and be reasonable. But these are the conversations that we should be having in Congress to protect the American people. And let's not say that just because people are emotional. I mean, my gosh, I'm kind of emotional. I mean, to see that many innocent Americans killed senselessly, of course that's emotional. But we've got to take action. We've got to do something.
And I'm more than willing to sit down and have conversations to figure out how we can help out. But the action that we take should be reasonable and common sense, of course, and it shouldn't unnecessarily infringe on people's constitutional rights. So I enjoyed the conversation, and I look forward to having a lot more.
All right.
And I enjoyed it as well. Our thanks to both congressmen for having that conversation.